5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is Chad here, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
I didn't get indicators at first. I got phone calls. Told me there was this object, glowing red object hovering above the facility. We still didn't have any indicators on our panel. I went to my commander to wake him up from his nap, and that's when we got these bells and whistles, very loud klaxon sounds, and also the lights changing from green to red. The green, of course, meant that they were launchable operational missiles ready to go, and when they turned red, they were unable to go, or no go condition, and disabled.
In 1969, the U.S. Air Force issued a statement that read, "No UFO investigated and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security." Bob Salas is here, and I'm going to ask him if he believes that statement is true. That and more is coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He served 7 years on active duty and worked as a weapons controller, commanded intercontinental ballistic missiles as a launch officer, and worked as an Air Force missile propulsion engineer on the Titan III program. It's a pleasure to have Bob Salas here tonight. Thank you so much for joining me, sir, and welcome.
Thank you, Cam. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. It's nice to have something to do tonight. And that's all we'll say about that. But, I'm in Montana, and, of course, you emailed me the other day and mentioned that you had done an interview in Montana, and that was your first one in 1996. Is it true that you were stationed in Maelstrom, but you spent that time in Roy, Montana, or how did that work? Roy, Montana is not in the middle of nowhere, but you can definitely see it from there, for sure. I've been there.
Yeah. Of course, I was stationed at Maelstrom Air Force Base, Montana, but we would go out on alert, and we'd drive. Normally, we'd drive in good weather. Sometimes we'd helicopter out. Well, in bad weather, we'd drive also. But that's where we... the incident that we'll talk about happened at Oscar Flight, which is near Roy, Montana. And we'll talk about another incident at Echo Flight, which is near Lewiston. Spent a lot of time I spent about 3 years in Montana. So it was a 3-year assignment. Got there about 1966. I think it was about August of 66, and left about June or July of 69.
That's about when I was born, right there, just north of Maelstrom Air Force Base, probably about the distance between Maelstrom and Roy, Montana. Which back in the day, what was out there? What was Inroy? Did they have much of a town there? It's nothing now. Was there anything to do there?
Well, we didn't go there to get entertained or go to a bar or anything. We just went there to go on alert, which was an underground facility, as you know, and so we'd spend 24 hours underground, get relieved by another crew, and then come on back. So I lived in Great Falls itself. So we would commute out there.
How long of a commute was that?
Oh, I'd say about 100 miles, more or less.
Now, if nobody is, or if anybody has been to Montana, they'll know that I don't know how big of an area is occupied by missiles that are administrated out of Malmstrom Air Force Base, but it has to be at least 100 by 100, wouldn't you say? Probably about that size?
There are, when I was there were about 15 launch control centers spread out to the west, slightly southwest of Great Falls, and of course further to the east, and then southeast. So we had 15 what we call launch control centers. Each launch control center had 10 missiles assigned to it. So at the time we had about 150. Now I couldn't tell you what they've got now.
Yeah, growing up there, I worked for different people, different farmers, and we drove equipment around missile silos, and it really wasn't anything different or unusual to us. It was just something that we always grew up around. So were there always Minuteman missiles out there? Is that predominantly what you were working with, or was there any Titan missiles at the time?
No, there were no Titans. There were never any Titans, as far as I know, in Montana. The Minuteman I was brought online just before the Cuban Missile Crisis, right around that time. So that would have been October of 62. So I got there in 66, but from all that time from 62 on, they had first the Minuteman I, then the Minuteman II, and now the Minuteman III, as far as I know.
And how many warheads per rocket missile?
Well, they did at one point have multiple warheads, but I think now, and when I was there, we only had one warhead, but it was pretty powerful. Doing my research later on, we had a warhead of about 800 kilotons, which put in perspective the nuclear weapon that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki was only about 15 to 20 kilotons. So our warheads were pretty powerful.
So basically, can you describe the duties of a missile launch operator?
Missile launch officer, there were two of us underground. We'd come on duty and we'd get, first before we went out, we'd get a briefing on the status of the missiles, status of the system, if there were any modifications going on, which we seem to have a lot of at times, any maintenance going on or anything unusual going on. We'd get briefed, and then we'd go out there, we'd relieve the crew, had regular procedures for that, and then we'd be on duty for 24 hours until we were relieved. And basically our duty would involve monitoring the system, make sure everything was working properly, call in maintenance if we had any glitches or problems, monitor for our security systems. We had security indicators. We have proximity warning system, so that if something came in the controlled area at the missile sites, the missiles themselves are located about a mile or so from this underground launch control center where I was. Like I said, there were two of us down there, and so we took turns staying alert. At times, one of us would take a nap, and the other would be on alert, etc. And that went on for the 24-hour period. We had about 6 guards upstairs, and of course, it was their job to keep security of the facility itself, make sure nothing entered unauthorized, and we had no unauthorized entry where the missiles themselves were located. So they would go on and patrol the area, make sure everything was safe.
Were you and your partner actually the two in charge of launching the missile if needed?
That's correct. Yeah, if we had been ordered to launch, it would have taken both of us, and we would have carried out those orders once we authenticated them.
Why is it important to have human hands-on with the device? I mean, obviously, they're fairly close to Malmstrom. Well, you could do it remotely. No, we didn't have that kind of ability at the time. Remember, this was 1967. Right. This was way before the internet, or we didn't have GPS or anything like that. Right. So we had to have people there, physically there, to go through the launch procedure. Does that answer your question? Yeah, because I know that if you're in the missile control area, how many different missiles are you charged with to launch at any given time, or an average? Well,
no, we had 10 nuclear missiles under our control. We could have launched 1 or 2 at a time, or we could have launched in salvo, which means we could have launched all 10 in sequence. So, but that was what we had control of, and yeah, my commander and I were in charge of those weapons. So,
and that was 24 hours on, 24 off. Did you work a rotation where you at least had a few days off to kind of?
Yeah, right. After we were relieved, we'd probably have 2 or 3 days off before we had to come back on alert. So it went like that for about 3 years.
3 years, and 24/7, 365 days a year. Somebody had to be down there and ready to go. So it's
absolutely, you bet. And I think that's still the case today. Of course, I think the international situation was a bit more tense at that time. This was during the Vietnam War, and we had, this hadn't been much after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we nearly got into a nuclear war. It was the closest we ever got to a nuclear war.
It's been a while, but as a kid, I used to drive by and I used to see a semi truck, and they were able to jack that semi truck up some way, so it was vertical. What's when that's actually happening? And I'm going to post a picture of that on my Facebook account. But what's actually happening when that semi truck is vertical next to the silo?
Well, they're probably lowering a missile or removing a missile from the silo. So at times you might have to remove and replace the missile or some of its components, and they'd have to pull the old missile out and put a new one in. So that was what that big trailer was about.
So in addition to people like you that are working below ground, you also had maintenance engineers and technicians who were constantly working on these things. Was it a labor intensive process? Did they need constant maintenance, or could they be in the ground for a while without being touched?
Well, every once in a while we have modifications that they want to install. And we did have the ability to send maintenance people out there at the missile silo, or the launch facility is what we call it, the launch facility where the missiles are actually located. And we had maintenance bays that they could go down and work on parts of the missile, such as the guidance system, and even the warhead area. So we could do some maintenance without having to pull the missile out. But these were very reliable systems at the time. Of course, it was the most advanced system in the world. And these were solid fuel missiles, so they could be launched immediately. There was no fueling involved. We had to fuel up, like with the Atlas and the Titan. So I wasn't on the maintenance side. I was on the operational side. But yeah, we had activity now and then with maintenance people going out to some of the sites. We'd have to go through procedures of allowing them in the sites and coordinating when the missiles were deactivated and keep an eye on them.
So what kind of perimeter security did you have back then in order to detect unseen people or cows or coyotes? Obviously, there's animals back then, and had to been some false alarms. But what was in place then to protect you?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we did have motion sensors so that if we could detect motion in the area of the launch facility or around the fencing area. And we had the indicators in our capsule, our underground capsule. We could tell if someone was trying to get in that fenced area. Or, like you say, every once in a while we would get a coyote or a bird or something go in there, and we'd have to send guards out there. So we had, like, that's one of the reasons we had security guards. We'd send them out there on patrol and check out security at those facilities.
In March of 1967, you obviously had some alarms go off. What's that like when it happens, and what's the standard operating procedure?
The 67 incident that we're going to talk about, I didn't get indicators at first. I got phone calls from the guards upstairs, and they were telling me about these lights in the sky. And then on the first call, and then the second call, of course, they told me there was this object, glowing red object hovering above the facility, above the front gate. We still didn't have any indicators on our panel. We had a panel where we could monitor the status of the missiles and the security of the area. So it wasn't until I hung up that second phone call where I was told that there was this glowing red object above us that I went to my commander to wake him up from his nap. And that's when we got these bells and whistles, very loud klaxon sounds inside the capsule, and also the lights changing from green to red. The green, of course, meant that they were launchable operational missiles ready to go. And when they turned red, they were unable to go, or no go condition, and disabled. And we did have during my incident, we did have two of the sites which had security lights on at the facilities, meaning there was some kind of an incursion in at those sites, at those launch facilities. And so I did send guards out there, and again, they saw the UFO over those sites. So we had a query system. We were able to query what the problem was with the other missiles, and the indicators or the query tape. It's just a message, really, of what was wrong on all of them. Each of them had guidance and control system failure. So on each of those, same issue.
So I heard the term shutting down. What does it mean by when those systems shut down?
Well, you can use the shutting down term or disabled. Basically, the missiles, when what happened was somehow, excuse me, a signal was sent to each of the missiles separately to, let's say, impact our guidance system. In fact, it upended what's called a stable platform. We had a gyroscopic navigational system for the missile. Once it's launched, it would have to calculate its position, speed, and things like that in order to accurately go on target. So what happened was each of the a signal was sent to each of those missiles to upset a stable platform in the guidance system, so that if the missile were launched, it wouldn't know how to accurately go on target. So that's why they were disabled. In other words, they shut themselves down because of this stable platform upset. And that's all really that happened with these missiles. There was no damage done to the systems. It was simply upset of the stable platform of the guidance system.
Now, back then, when you're looking at these indicators that give you some kind of display of what's happening with these missiles, what did that look like then? Is it just lights? Is it how do you know?
Yeah, like I said, we had a display panel, the commander's console, and it had a whole bunch of lights. The top two rows of lights. The top one was alert status, or green, and the second row was no-go, or red status light. So we made sure they were all green. That was our job, to make sure they were ready to go. But on this particular night, all 10 of those missiles got red lights, and which means they were all disabled while this object was still above us.
Wow. So after troubleshooting the situation, was there a determination as to the reason of the malfunction?
Yeah, the mystery really was how that was able to happen, because, like I said, the missiles were individually connected to the system. It wasn't like when one went down, they'd all go down. So it wasn't like that. Each missile had its own cabling system, and this, by the way, was a underground cable. It was triply shielded from electromagnetic interference. So whatever this object did, it would have to have penetrated through 60 feet of earth and concrete, and then penetrate a triply shielded cable, and then send a particular signal to a particular part of the missile, the guidance system, and upset that stable platform I was talking about. So this was impossible, basically. And even the Air Force admitted that in one of the documents I got back. So they couldn't understand it, and nobody could understand it. And to this day, I don't think we've ever gotten straight answers to how this was able to happen. It was an impossibility, basically.
So after that happened, what has to be done after the whole system shuts down, and what do you have to do to make those missiles ready for alert status?
Yeah, what we had to do is get maintenance crews out to each of those sites, and they had to go through procedures to start the missiles back up. And part of that procedure meant physically shooting the stars and aligning what we call it was a collimator light that would we'd have to shine through a particular porthole in the missile and orient the missile correctly, and of course make sure that that platform, that navigational platform was oriented correctly. And so it was a little bit of a procedure, but it wasn't that difficult. Where I think most of the missiles got back up on alert with these maintenance crews working again day and night to get these missiles back up on alert. Within about a day or two, we got them all back up. What we had was inertial guidance system. Inertial meaning once the missile's launched, there's a computer that calculates its speed and its azimuth, and it's basically speed and azimuth, and it would go through its calculations and determine its position on the Earth. So this was very old school type of navigation, okay? We had no satellites to guide us, nothing like that. So that's why it's so important that this guidance platform was properly calibrated. And the whole system had to be calibrated very accurately. Like I said, they actually went out and shot the stars in order to position input into the computer so the missile position so that it would know exactly where it was and where it would have to go. It
basically knows where it is from that initial point, and it has to keep track of itself the whole way, which seems seems rather amazing. My point was that now they have GPS and computers. Back then, I had actually visited a Titan silo, and they were still using computerized punch tape, and which seems crazy even then. But and they said it was very accurate, despite such a low power computerized machine. So obviously that system, there was a vulnerability in there. Were you ever aware of any effort to repair or fix that vulnerable spot, or somehow to adjust for any sort of interaction with whatever that was from happening again?
Well, I know they did a lot of work on EMF, or electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic forces that the missile system might have been exposed to. But we never, after the incident, you remember I mentioned we had briefings every time we went out on alert, but we never got a briefing on what happened to our missile systems. And this happened in 1967. I was there until 1969, and I never got debriefed ever on what happened at Oscar Flight or Echo Flight, the two flights went down, the UFOs. So it was a very hush-hush operation. The Air Force did not want, they wanted to keep even the studies they were doing, the investigations they were doing, that they wanted to keep that highly secret, even from us.
In August of 1950, just west of the Air Force Base, there was a UFO sighting there, and part of that was videotaped. Why, in your opinion, are there so many UFOs in that part of the world? Because it's also my opinion.
Well, I can't answer that. Other than we do have a lot of nuclear missiles in the northern tier of the U.S. That's the only thing I can come up with, is because my conclusion is that on these UFO incidences, there have been many around nuclear bases, and my conclusion that my incident was simply a message from, I'll just call them extraterrestrial craft, because I believe they are extraterrestrial. The message is, get rid of your nuclear weapons. These are not weapons of war. They really are weapons of mass destruction. They could destroy civilization as we know it.
This is it true that this was investigated by AFOSI, and were they a presence in that area? Did they come specifically for that incident, or had they been known to investigate before?
No, each base had an AFOSI office. I encountered AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigation, when I returned to the base after the incident. We were ordered to our commander's office, squadron commander's office, and that's where this fellow from AFOSI shoved a sheet of paper in our faces and sign here. You're never to talk about this ever again. Right. And so, yeah, I know AFOSI was part of the cover-up. They were part of the, make sure this is kept secret. So, yeah. So, but the main reason, one of the reasons that the Air Force wanted to keep this, even from us crew members, was that there was an investigation going on, the Condon investigation on UFOs that the Air Force had contracted with the University of Colorado, and under Edward Condon, one of the professors there. They did we'll call it a whitewash investigation. It wasn't really a real investigation of UFOs around military bases. And so they didn't want those investigators to get wind of what happened with our missiles on those two incidents. And that's why they kept it secret.
So groups like the Condon Committee and other groups that are government related that investigated UFOs over the years, do you feel that's a legitimate investigation, or being that they,
no?
Yeah, because AFOSI has been maybe implicated or have been talked about as being disinformation specialists. Is that all part of that same scheme?
Yes, absolutely. The Air Force has never been honest about the UFO phenomenon. Initially, the Roswell incident in 1947, the Air Force came out and said it was they had recovered a craft, and then a flying saucer, and then they recanted that the next day. And ever since, it's been a disinformation program to disinform the public, make it subject to ridicule, and not take it seriously. So they have changed their story on Roswell many times. And like I said, the Condon investigation started in 1966. It ended in 1969, early 1969. And it was intended basically to give the Air Force an out, so they wouldn't have to respond to public inquiries on UFOs. And so the Condon investigators, who, by the way, knew about the Oscar and Echo flight incidents at Malmstrom, and I go into that in my book. I don't know if you've read my books. I've written 2 books, one called Fated Giant. The other one, more recent, is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon. But in there, I go into details as to how the cover-up was done on UFO incidents by the Condon investigators, so that by the end they could claim they had studied the subject and found no credible information, so that the Air Force would have to continue to investigate UFOs. So since 1969, officially, the Air Force has officially not investigated UFO incidents, although there's much to support the fact that indeed they have, but certainly not to the point where they feel they have to report to the public as to the validity of this phenomenon.
Any idea who the people were in the Condon committee that basically worked through the University of Colorado? Were they legitimate scientists, or was it just, I already asked if it was part of the disinformation, but who were the actual people?
Yeah, well, Edward Condon himself was very legitimate. As a matter of fact, he was on the Manhattan Project initially. He was the deputy to Oppenheimer. But very soon after the beginning of the Manhattan Project, development of the first nuclear bomb, he was let go. He was dismissed for unknown reason. Now, so that would have been probably around 1944 or sometime. In 1947, I believe, or 46, Condon became a government official. I believe it was trying to think. Anyway, he worked under Truman administration as one of his secretaries. But in 1947, he was accused by J. Edgar Hoover of being a communist spy. This is in writing. Again, I've got this in my books. And after this was when they had the communist scare, and so after an investigation, he lost his security clearance and had to resign his position because his position actually involved nuclear weapons. So from about 49 until 1966, he was just a civilian and had no authority with the government. In other words, he didn't have access to classified information, which he wanted to have because he was a physicist. He was a verifiable good physicist, scientist. And so the Air Force came to him in 1966 and offered him his security clearance back if he would take on the UFO investigation and do it their way, basically. Like I said, basically a whitewash. This other guy, his chief investigator, was a man by the name of Roy Craig. He was basically an associate professor at University of Colorado in chemistry, I believe. And he had no investigative experience, but Condon made him his top investigator. The other fellow of importance is Robert Lowe. Lowe was the deputy to Condon. I'm not sure. I think he had a technical background, engineering background, but he had started the project saying that ridiculing basically the UFO phenomenon, and And so he was not, he did not believe in it at all, and said so openly. So anyway, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the investigation was botched. The fellow I mentioned, Roy Craig, was given names, phone numbers of people who had actually seen the UFOs over Oscar and Echo flight facilities during those incidents, and could testify to the investigators. Craig went out to Malmstrom Air Force Base, was told by the operations commander, man by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Chase, that there was nothing to this UFO question or business, and he should just forget about it. And so he did. Basically, he left Malmstrom without investigating any of the reports. He certainly didn't talk to me or any of the other crew members or guards that saw these objects during the incidents. So I think I've proven pretty well in my books that this was a whitewash. It was not intended to be a serious investigation of UFOs.
And in the 60s, there was so many ways to shut people up, like accusing someone of being a communist. That was seemed to work pretty easily and pretty quickly.
Yeah, right. And there's a stigma attached to it. Like even today, there's still a bit of a stigma attached to the whole subject. If, for example, airline pilots, if they see one, they won't report it because they don't want to be stigmatized as someone who's seen a UFO.
So was there any thought amongst you guys reporting a sighting of a UFO or lights or something? Was there any thought about being stigmatized? I mean, obviously not much of that happened, but it still had to kind of go through somebody's head.
Well, what happened was, like I said, we were ordered the next day to sign these documents, never to talk about our incident. And so were the other crews. And we did. We were basically forced to sign. And if we had talked about it, we could have spent a lot of time in prison, basically revealing classified information. The same thing with the guards. The guards called me the next day, actually, and wanted to meet and talk about this, but I couldn't. I was forced not to be able to talk to anybody about it, relatives, anybody else in the Air Force. So we kept that oath until I was out of the Air Force in 1994. So this was some 27 years later, 1994. I had been out of the Air Force, and I was getting ready to retire from my other government job, which was an FAA engineer. So in 1994, I came across this book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. Opened it up to page 301, and there was a little paragraph stating that UFOs had been responsible for the shutdown of missiles in 1967 in Montana. It was just a short paragraph, but I was very surprised because this course was classified. And so I thought, well, maybe the Air Force declassified this for some reason, because here it was in this book by Timothy Good. He's a British author. He's written other books. So I took a chance and talked to a MUFON investigator, Mutual UFO Network investigator, and asked him to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the Air Force about what was described as the Echo flight incident. It described what happened to me so vividly, so accurately, that I thought that was my incident, because after 27 years, I had pretty much forgotten exactly what which flight I was at, and where I was at the time, etc. The dates. A lot of time had gone by, and I deliberately tried to suppress memories of it because I couldn't talk about it. But anyway, I thought it was my incident, so I asked him to submit a FOIA request, not mentioning anything about UFOs. I just asked about this particular incident where missiles shut down under strange circumstances. The Air Force wrote back and said it was still classified. However, it had been so long, they were going to declassify it, and they were going to send us some documents. So they did. They sent me documents on the Echo flight incident. Now, as soon as they did that, basically declassifying it, which, again, at the time I thought that was my incident, I started talking publicly. And like I said, in 1996, I gave an interview to the Great Falls Tribune, and it's on actually a front page report in the Great Falls Tribune. You can look it up, August 13th, 1996.
Did they contact you or did you contact them?
I think I contacted them, yeah. I talked to one of the reporters, and he was interested. And so he invited me over, and I gave him an interview. What details I could remember at the time, like I said, it had been so long. So it was a process to recover details, more details. It took a while.
Were you ever contacted by the military afterward in response to your interview?
No, as a matter of fact. Nope.
And I would feel that, once that was declassified, it shouldn't be an issue. But then again, I'm sure were all the details, were they all released in that Freedom of Information Act request, or was
no. What we got from the Air Force was some very interesting material, certainly. One of the things we got was a telex from SAC headquarters, Strategic Air Command headquarters, stating that they needed to find out what happened immediately, and they listed names. So we did get a couple of names of some of the civilians from Boeing aircraft. Boeing had the top contract for the systems, the Minuteman systems. And so they had an investigative team go out there, and they did some field tests, bench tests on various ways the missiles could have been shut down, and discounted all of them. And like I said, the final result of their investigation was that they couldn't explain it. There was no way to explain how this could have happened. It was highly improbable that this could have happened in the way it did. So we got that kind of information. We did get a report of UFOs being rumored in the area, stated in one of the documents. It actually stated that UFOs, it was a rumor that UFOs were in the area at the time of the incident, but those rumors were discounted now. We contacted the person who ostensibly wrote that, and he said he didn't write that somebody put that in his report. So again, showing the cover-up. So I go into great detail on, matter of fact, my first book has a lot of those initial documents that I received. A lot of them were classified, but they do detail the shutdown of the Echo flight. All 10 missiles under very unusual, strange circumstances.
Did it list any of the probable causes, or is that where it ended?
Like I said, they didn't come up with a probable cause. Um, the only
That's convenient.
the only general idea they had was some kind of electromagnetic force, but that's a very general term.
Still, that's a big admission, though. Some kind of electromagnetic force. I mean, that's giving up some valuable information, and what back then could have been created such a force, through that type of a system and being so protected underground. It's pretty remarkable.
Oh yeah, exactly. We had nothing then, and I don't think we've got anything now that could have done what they did. That's why I'm convinced these were extraterrestrial craft. And there was another incident when one of the maintenance people was trying to bring the missile back up on alert. He was actually at the launch facility, and he gave me his statement, although he doesn't want me to reveal his name, but I would reveal it if I got called before Congress, let's say. But he went out there and tried to restart the missile. A UFO came over, hovered right above him, and sent signals down to shut the missile down. Every time he went through his checklist to try to bring it back up, at a particular point in the checklist, the missile would be shut down by this object above him. And he said he could actually feel the kind of a column or like a rope of energy coming down the silo that would do this. So these objects, whatever they are, wherever they're from, knew exactly how our missile systems worked in great detail.
So was there ever a description of what these things look like other than a bright light?
He did say the guard. I went upstairs after I was relieved and tried to talk to the guard. The guard by that time had probably been told not to talk to me or anybody else about it. But I was finally able to get out of him that he could barely see a kind of an oval shape structure inside this bright reddish orange light. But he couldn't make much detail out from it. So basically that's the best I can do is what these things look like. Same with the guards. They saw UFOs at the launch facilities, and they were basically just large white lights hovering over the facilities.
Wow. Growing up there, and I've made it very well known that I've seen some very strange things at night between Great Falls and the Canadian border. Were there ever any rumors at the base of any experimental aircraft there or tests of anything similar like the ones that you would see at Area 51?
No, that was the first question I asked my commander when I went to his office was this some kind of an Air Force exercise, some kind of a new craft that was being tested? And he said, absolutely not. He was high level, and he knew what was going on at the base. And of course, we would have been briefed, like I said, at our briefing, our daily briefing before we went out. We would have been briefed of something like that, if something like that were going on, and we were never briefed of anything like that. And they would not, even if it had been experimental, it certainly would not have disabled 20 missiles within a week, right. At a time when we were on high alert and during wartime, during Vietnam.
Interesting. So through the Freedom of Information Act, have you ever looked into other similar events happening in Montana or North Dakota or anywhere that there's nuclear missile sites?
Yes, absolutely. Well, after I went public, I started becoming much more interested in the subject and did a lot of investigation. Yeah, I've contacted many witnesses who have told me different incidents all over the world, really. Of course, there was another incident in Maelstrom in 1975. North Dakota at Minot Air Force Base, South Dakota, Ellsworth. Let's see, also the one in near Nebraska. I forget what that one was, near Wyoming. And so I've got quite a few other stories of others, we're talking missile bases now. So these are other military officers at missile bases that had similar incidents. In fact, Mr. Schindele, Lieutenant Schindele at Minot Air Force Base had a very similar incident, only when he relieved the crew on duty, they told him a UFO had shut down all 10 of their missiles. And so when he relieved them, all 10 of the missiles had been shut down. So mine is not the only case. There have been many, like I said, in the U.S. and worldwide.
So can you sum up this reaction by the U.S. military for me? Why the non-disclosure, for example? And wouldn't you think that there's so many non-military people that have experienced this, that there should be some sort of compromise and, I mean, letting us know something. I can't understand why not, because it's so prevalent.
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I can give you my best guess.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
One of the reasons they have not disclosed, the government has not disclosed the validity of this phenomenon, is they don't know what to do about it. They don't have any control over it. And of course, it is politically, it is their job to keep the country safe, secure from all enemies, foreign, domestic, and even enemies they don't understand. So they at this point, I'm sure the military part of the government considers these ET objects or these UFOs as some sort of enemy. I don't, but I do believe the government does. So that's part of it. The other part is I'm sure they've recovered craft and probably talked to the occupants themselves and gleaned technical information which has been, let's say, used to develop weaponry and or new technology. And so those secrets are highly valuable. Obviously, they're valuable. And so we have greed and corruption involved in those secrets. In other words, they can be used to enrich individuals. They can also be used, those secrets can also be used as bartering chips between intelligence agencies in different parts of the world. So that's also a part of it, because I do think there is a worldwide organization, if you will, I call it the UFO cabal, that is controlling these secrets, probably exchanging information at a very highly secretive level, and need to know with relatively few individuals in the intelligence communities. So that's going on. And so for these reasons, I think there has been a concerted effort to discredit the whole subject, to ridicule it, to intimidate witnesses. So that disinformation campaign has been going on, I think, since at least 1947, and continues to this day.
I think it's possible this knowledge and lack of disclosure makes us look even Possibly more powerful to other nations, especially when we ration and distribute these bits of info like we do. From time to time, things slip out, and it could possibly make us look like we know something more than we do.
Yeah, that's part of it too. Yeah, it's a game. It's a high-level intel game. But like I said, I don't believe they're able to control the phenomenon or the ETs or the craft. I don't think they have, let's say, weaponry or even detection systems that are foolproof that can detect the presence of these craft, or even destroy them. So I still think they're playing that game. They're trying to figure out how to do that, and this has been going on. So I don't think we're going to get complete disclosure or honest disclosure. You know, we've heard reports of this. You know, the Navy releasing the videos of the pilots from the aircraft carriers as a sign that the government's going to start disclosing. I don't believe that at all. These videos were probably released by mistake or only for other reasons. But no, I don't think we're going to get government disclosure until ET actually wants disclosure. And by the way, ET has been, I'll call them ET, all right, has been disclosing in their own way for a long, long time. You know, they've this abduction phenomenon, they've taken people. That is very real. They've taken people and disclosed to people certain things. There have also been other methods. Well, just the fact that they've showed up at nuclear bases again is to me a message or messages. They've shown themselves at various times, like over Phoenix, the Phoenix Lights, huge craft like that had been seen many times, not just in Phoenix. So basically, they're telling us they're here. And basically, they're telling us it's up to us to clean up our act. In other words, we have to figure out how to solve our own problems. And one of those problems is nuclear weapons. Obviously, it's a real danger to our survival. And so we got to figure out a way of abolishing those and getting rid of those. But I'm sure what they'd like to see is us to work together, worldwide to resolve our problems, and we have many, obviously.
Right now, what we're going through is definitely a wake-up call, and maybe we can compensate, obviously in other ways that are greater than just solving a problem with a virus, and people might get a little smarter and
right,
not pretend we know anything. And I think that ET, they show us their presence in ways that we probably don't understand, and they don't really owe us anything to do it blatantly in English or in some way we can't understand. So I mean, they are what they are. But let everybody know, Robert, where they can find your books right now, because your most recent one's pretty fantastic. Yeah,
thank you. You can get both my books on Amazon.com. If you want to go to my website, it's spiralgalaxy.org. That's all one word, spiralgalaxy.org. And if you go to the phenomenon page, I think UFO phenomenon page of that website, you'll be able to click into my the part of it that has my evidence. It's I think it says my evidence, and in there I've got documents and actually audio tape of me talking to my commander, Fred Mywald, at the time, and there's Walt Fiegel, who was in command of Echo Flight. And we've also got other documents in there. I think they can still order through that website, but for sure through Amazon.
And you can also find Robert in the August 13th, 1996 Great Falls, Montana Tribune newspaper. And
yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up and post that. So my guest tonight is the author of Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, How World Governments Have Conspired to Conceal Humanity's Biggest Secret, and available on Amazon. And Robert Salas, thank you so much, sir. It's been indeed a pleasure, and you're an amazing man. I appreciate your service as well.
Thank you, Cam. I enjoyed it very much, and I certainly wanted to do this to say hi to my friends in Montana. I hope I still have some. It's been a long time, but you live in a great place, great state. Learned how to fly fish there, and never forget it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You always have a friend in Montana. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.